show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gators and grannies, to a Friday morning edition of The Big Puzzle, coming to you live from my living room in northern British Columbia through the facilities of UCY TV radio. Thanks for tuning in and lending us an ear. Today, I'm really honored and pleased to be joined by two incredible gentlemen. Tony Hurst, I've known for about 3 years now, I guess it is, and has incredible insight into what's going on in our world. And I'm also joined by Mark Windows. Mark has a site called Windows on the World, does a TV show and a regular weekly radio show, and honored to be joined by both these gentlemen. Mark, I've never had a chance to talk with you on the air, but I'm looking forward to our conversation. Why don't you start off by telling people a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing in the last 3-4 years of your life, and I'll let Tony say a few things after that, and we'll get into a conversation, gentlemen.
Yeah, hi, Barry. Yeah, I've been looking into things for quite some time. I was always interested in what they call esoteric knowledge, or stuff that's hidden or occult. And several years ago, I started up a website called landofthefree.co.uk, and we were uncovering a lot of the corruption that we have now come to accept as pretty much normal, especially in this country, the way the courts are. And we looked into controversies that have been created through the court system and remedies, really, through things like fines, penalties, parking charges, all that sort of stuff going into council tax, or what you have over there, probably property tax. And we found that the corruption was happening within the courts, and that led us on to bigger and better things. And we had several successful court cases. And then I was approached by David Icke from the People's Voice TV, which is a project which didn't actually last very long in this country, which was a television station which was fronted by David Icke. And I had a show on there called Windows on the World, which became really popular. And we were even getting lawyers phoning in saying, what you guys are saying is absolutely right. We were exposing a lot of what's going on in regards to things like property theft through the courts, but we actually cover the bigger picture of what's going on. So that sort of grassroots thing of basically, people's liberties being taken away or infringed upon and trespass upon rights is a really good way into finding out what's actually going on in the world.
Hey, man, you know what? Knowledge is power. With Mark, and I'm watching a lot of organizations now that are doing the same thing in the United States, taking the law to the government and putting them in their place. Tony, you want to say a couple things? You and Mark are actually doing a show now. Is that correct? Once a week?
Yeah, that's right. I started off in radio nearly 4 years ago, just helping out with the technical stuff and learning a bit as I went. But my kind of journey started about 5, maybe 6 years ago. And Mark has been a big influence on me. I've learned an awful lot from him. He was talking about stuff that we can actually go outside our door and see in action now. Many years ago, his work stands up. He does good research, and I couldn't be working with someone better over here, I don't think.
Well, it's very nice of you to say so, Tony, and very encouraging.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, yeah. Hey, Mark, like I said, I had to put it all together this morning. I've listened to you on Chuck's show. I think I've probably listened to it 2 or 3 times now. He had you on in a regular spot there for a while, I guess, and now you go in there once a month and have a chat with him. But
yeah, I think it's the time, actually, Barry, because it's like 1 to 3 a.m., kind of burns you out a bit the next day, and also burns out information, because what I did with Chuck's show was going into ancient London history. Now, it sounds like a bit of a leap from parking tickets, but that's where things take you. Once you start uncovering all this stuff, you go into history, and I was looking into the history of what happened in a certain part of London called Smithfield, and those shows are still there on Chuck's channel and also on windowsontheworld.net. Then we went up to the Fire of London, but it was all really about the administrative process that was behind that, of how statute came into force and people's rights are taken away. And really a lot of this stuff that we find now, especially the terrorism stuff, is basically about taking away rights or infringing upon people's rights. And we've seen that since 9/11. Now, today we've had a bomb, well, it's a bomb in inverted commas, in London, at Parsons Green tube station on a train. And basically, it's the most bizarre and, in my opinion, quite ridiculous story. What it actually is a Lidl bag, which is a supermarket chain, which is based in Germany. We have them all over the world. I think you have Lidl there, don't you, Aldi? And basically, it's a bucket in a Lidl bag with some wires hanging out of it and a towel on the top. And it has a few flames shooting out. Now, nobody on this train, you can see a video of it, was actually bothered. And they saw some smoke coming out, and someone said, that bucket's smoking. But apparently, this is a bomb, in inverted commas. It says the bomb used at Parsons Green seems to be a relatively unsophisticated weapon whose technology is available on the dark corners of the internet. So on the dark corners of the internet, you can buy a little carrier bag and a white plastic bucket, apparently. Now, the police have described the device as an IED, which just means improvised explosive device, right? I mean, everybody knows that, but they make it sound as though this is some kind of technical thing. It says a form of bomb developed and widely used in Iraq and Afghanistan. So maybe they have Lidl out there, I don't know. But the huge majority used in Afghanistan have been crudely simple, it says here, some costing little more than £5. It says, when some former Taliban members joined the Afghan police in Helmand, British explosives instructors were astonished at the dexterity with which they could assemble or dismantle an IED in just a few minutes. Well, a primitive bomb is not difficult to make. And what they're doing here, Barry, is they're comparing this device, this basically carrier bag that was on fire, with the bombs that were used in the 7/7 bombing. Now, in 7/7 over here, it was the London Underground bombing in 2005. The actual explosive devices was stated to be in rucksacks, which were carried by the suicide bombers. And there was no real connection here. I can't see any connection, because the 7/7 bombings, whatever happened, it's a great book called Terror on the Tube by Nick Colostrom, that the actual explosions seem to have been placed under the train. So for security experts to be comparing these two is absolutely ridiculous. And of course, you get these guys, so retired ex-army officer, bomb disposal expert, Basil Smythe Hume, joins us now from his home in Berkshire. You say, well, it bears all the hallmarks of Islamic terrorism. And they go, well, how do you know that? Well, of course, the other two threats, the far right, and of course, the Republican Irish threat has been largely diminished. So we would say this bears all the hallmarks of ISIS. And then it's back to the studio, you know. But basically, what we're looking at here is a carrier bag that seems to have been set on fire. I don't want to diminish it, because they're saying that 22 people were injured. But the big question is how.
That it didn't actually explode then.
There's no report of an explosion.
But all the headlines are saying it exploded. But if you look at the pictures there, it just the bag's on fire. The bucket hasn't blown up. There's no smoke damage anywhere around it. It doesn't even look like there's been much of a fire, let alone an explosion. It doesn't make any sense to me, what I've seen of it so far.
Seems like they don't want to let a good story go to waste, eh?
Well, it's just remarkable how this sort of stuff gets propagated, and you really wonder what is behind it. I mean, we know that most of these people have links with MI5 and the security service, most of the patsies or stroke terrorists. involved in this stuff. I mean, every single one of them has links to MI5, which in itself should be questioned more by our media. But we don't have a media in this country. We have a PR industry like this one. It's just turned out this story. And this guy's obviously spent 2 minutes on this story. He's got no research. And it came out a couple of hours ago, this. So this is the sort of thing we get. And we never get any real clarity about the situation, about really what's happened. I mean, really, there should be a lot of camera phone footage now available if this device went off on the underground and 22 people were injured, because everybody's got camera phones now. There'd be hundreds and hundreds of people who had footage of it. So it's all very, very strange, and we never get to the bottom of it. But basically now Trump is saying we've got to shut down the internet. I mean, what's he trying to do? Stop people shopping at Lidl? I don't understand. It's absolutely bizarre. But the reactions to these things are more bizarre than the events themselves.
Exactly. They're getting the reaction that they want. And I didn't hear Trump say that. Did he actually say they want to shut down the internet?
Yeah, it's in an article that I just found. Yeah, he did say that. Yeah, it's a bit crazy. I mean, it's so out of the blue. But the thing with the Trump, you never quite know what he's going to say. And this is a bit of a surprising one. Yeah, he's basically asked for the internet to be shut down. But why? I can't see the connection between the internet and this device, but they seem to have made that connection in this news article, saying that yes, it's relatively unsophisticated weapon whose technology is available on the darker corners of the internet, whatever that means.
So we better shut that internet down, because now there's dark corners where we can go get bombs. Is that what they're saying, Mark? Because this is bizarre what you're telling me.
Those dark corners, sorry, they've existed for a long time. You've been able to get a cookbook since I've been on the internet, which is 18 years now. So, they've always been about. And worse than that, when we was kids, we used to be able to buy all the things that you needed, and we used to go out over the fields and experiment, and we could make explosions with just stuff that you could buy out of a chemist. So,
absolutely, saltpeter and sugar. I mean,
yep.
We used to do that at school. Yeah, frighten the teachers. But imagine if you did that now, you'd have helicopters, dogs. You'd probably be shot on sight,
You'd probably get suspended from school.
Well, it'd be worse than that here, Barry, because they really would bring the terror police in. I mean, the thing is that you've got a bucket that's on fire on a tube train. You've got these, what I call the martial law terror clowns coming, which are these robo-cops with all of this padding on, with machine guns. I mean, what has that got to do with a bucket being on fire? It's really hard to say what that's got to do with it. Everything is so disconnected with all this stuff. It's only the press that put it together in this rather confusing narrative, which we never, ever get to the bottom of.
Well, you're seeing the same thing with any press outlet anywhere in the world right now, Mark. They're all
yes.
I mean, the CBC in Canada is absolutely a joke. It's funded by the taxpayers, but it is so biased. It's unreal. And we're seeing that everywhere. It doesn't matter where you look. There's no actual information being put out by the media that they want you to hear.
Well, there's actually no information being put out by the media. We have just changed one letter.
They put out information, but it's just junk. It's so far from the truth that anybody with any common sense can weed through it.
Yes, by information I meant sort of real information, rather than just press releases, because that's what we get here. We've covered it a lot. I did a show called BBC Fake Reality Exposed. The BBC actually, to try and gain more credibility, they put out this website called Reality Check, and also they have these sort of little video, well, it's basically like the little, they're like a little 3-minute infomercial, really. And they put all the reasons down why they think an event has been corrupted, or it's sort of portrayed in a certain way, or the information hasn't been presented properly. And they try and do this analysis of it. And it's absolutely ridiculous, because they use completely skewed and wrong information to start with. So the whole thing is pathetic, and it's called Reality Check. And they are serious about this. I mean, it's quite interesting, because I do know the news editor of ITN News over here. Now, ITN News used to have quite a good reputation, and I was telling him about what we do, gave him my card. He said, yes, you're right, we are largely PR driven now, and I've been in mainstream media for over 20 years, and I've never been able to make an impact. And I said, that's because you're in mainstream media. How do you expect to do that? And the last thing I saw him doing was basically a hit piece on farmers. So you've got farmers being blamed for all these farming accidents, basically. And it was clearly to demonize farmers because of Brexit, British farmers. That's clearly what it was about. So basically, you've got this stupid narrative that always comes in, and they're now trying to label anything other than this kind of PR-led stuff fake news. But to get onto the point of this guy was largely in agreement with what I was saying. And then I mentioned somebody who'd cured themselves of prostate cancer. And it was just like, I mean, it couldn't have been worse. It was like the most offensive thing that he could have heard. I said, wow. But what do you mean? Someone's cured themselves of cancer? What do you mean? It's impossible, you know? And he just laid into me. I was so surprised, you know, news editor of ITN. Then I got my friend who actually knew about the cure. And this guy had cured himself with 3 weeks to live, prostate cancer, with a mixture of ginger, nettle tea and graviola. And I got my friend to email Chris at ITN and no response. You'd think that people who were news gatherers would at least be interested. But this is the thing, the conditioning is off the charts.
Wow. You know what? I got two ladies that are going to join me next Friday in my community here, and I've been talking to them about getting them on the air here and telling people what they did to kill their cancer. And all they did, and many people are aware of the fact that, you know, you raise your alkalines levels in your body, that cancer will die. That cancer cannot live in an alkaline environment. And that's all these ladies did, is they brought their alkaline levels. They went and got a pH test kit. They tested their pH. They found out when they first tested it was extremely acidic. And of course, cancer thrives in an acidic, oxygen-starved environment, and that's where our society's going. They raised their alkaline levels. They kept it at 8.3. I think they told me 8.2, 8.3 for 3 weeks, and all cancer died in their bodies. And these two ladies have agreed to join me next Friday morning. So please, folks, listen to this story because it really touches you. When you hear how easy it is to actually beat cancer. And that's just one of the cures that we talk about. There's multiple cures for cancer. The sooner that society wakes up to this, folks, the sooner we'll stop this madness called chemotherapy drugs, and all the crap that goes with it. It is right in front of our face, folks. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely right, Chuck. But I only brought that up because of the reaction that I got. It really was like I'd done something absolutely terrible. And it wasn't just him who turned on me. It was someone who was talking to him. And I couldn't believe it. I was kind of shocked. So, as I said, I got the guy to email in the evidence. And he never responded at all. But that is really what the mainstream media is like. They don't seem to have any journalistic interest anymore. And that's quite amazing, because when some of these people started off, journalism was still, well, alive in some respects. There were some journalists around. We still have one or two, but the content of these rolling news channels, I think, is what's really destroyed a lot of it, because there's no real information being conveyed at all. By information, just to correct what we said before, I mean, you know, useful information. You know. Well,
Chuck O'Celli just asked me to mention, to ask you to talk about interrogating the news. Okay, he wants you to throw that in. That was a message from Chuck O'Celli. He's in our chat room right now listening. Good morning, Chuck.
Oh, right. So what was that? Just say that again, Barry. I missed that.
Interrogating the news.
Interrogating the news. Absolutely. Yeah, we did quite a few shows on that. And yes, that video, BBC Reality Check Exposed, got a lot of hits. And basically, I just pointed out how they'd doctored footage twice in Syria. They'd used some footage which was a fake footage of an alleged chemical attack in a hospital, which just happened to happen as they had their cameras rolling. And they used the same footage twice, but they just zoomed into this woman who was actually related to somebody in the rebel forces within Syria. And it's just incredible. I did a whole story on it, can be found on YouTube, but I think we mentioned it on Chuck's show. We went into a lot of these examples, and they are shocking. But this is the mainstream media. What can we do about it? Well, we can just give the alternative view, which is the response to their fake news, you know, and we've been doing it quite successfully.
just keep calling them on their lies, and eventually people will maybe see them. You know, that's all you can do, because a lot of people are still indoctrinated by mainstream media. I know a lot of people go home at the end of the day and they turn on ABC or CBC, and that's what they use for information. And as soon as we get people out of that stigma, maybe we can make some headway here.
Well, yes, and the thing is that the mainstream media is largely dying off in a big way. In this country, it's interesting because if you ask many people how much of it they believe, they don't believe as much as they used to. The thing is that there is what's called an artificial womb that's created, and people want to believe that things are a certain way, and that's the problem. I don't think it's really about the problem with disproving the fake news of the mainstream media. It's getting people to actually realize what system they're in and why it works the way it does. That's the key to it. It's not so much what's coming out of the media, but people's inherent beliefs, that they believe that society works in a certain way. And the great thing about the sort of research that we've done over the years is it takes you dispassionately into why we are classed as property, what property actually is, and what we are to the state. And it's not personal, it's just business, that's all. And people find that really difficult to get their heads around. They find that impossible to believe because they have a belief that society is some kind of blanket and it's there to protect them. But it's nothing of the sort. And it's much better to know this stuff than not to know it. And my experiences in courts and with authorities, which has now gone up to Crown Court level, and very, very serious breaches of what judges would call trust and, well, procedure, is astonishing. We had a story in this country a few months ago about how the Crown Prosecution Service and the police were failing to bring forth evidence which would help defence witnesses. And I've just been in this situation, and we're going to report on this. It's now in the public domain, but it's incredible what's going on. And unless people experience this firsthand, they would never believe it. And that's the strange thing. You know, people still say that would never happen. But we're getting more and more people it's happening to. So that does tend to wake people up pretty rapidly when they realise that the system that they're in works nothing like the way they believe it does.
Yeah, it's really hard to get people to come outside of their bubble. When I personally, when I first started looking at this, it was about 8 years ago. A friend of mine said to me, "Barry, you got to sit down and watch 9/11: Architecture of Truth." And I'll be quite honest, up to that point in my life, I really, really wasn't paying attention too much what was going on inside our governments. I knew there's a lot of crap going on, but I really never paid attention to it. And that night, I sat down and watched that movie, and I remember the feelings that I had inside my brain and my body that night. There were rage and just absolute. The fact that I'd actually been deceived this long and not been able to see it, I remember the feelings I went through, and everybody that goes outside the bubble actually starts to realize that things aren't the way they're portrayed to be. They go through the same emotions, and a lot of people just don't want to go there. They just refuse to go there. They want to continue to believe that everything is going to be fine, that the government is working for them. I know that's what I went through when I first woke up to all this crap. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah.
What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, it's quite a responsibility, really, when you do understand what's going on, or at least some of it, and then you try and pass that on to people. We've got a lot of things to think about, because it doesn't work well for everyone for various reasons, depending on where they're at in their lives and the degrees of cognitive dissonance that they suffer. And when you do get those that will listen, and you do wake them up, if you like, then their life changes forever. It's a dark place to be. A lot of people go into depression and all that. So it's a fair old responsibility. But most of it is a lack of understanding of the corporation and what a corporation is. And simplified, everything is now a corporation, including you and me, our police forces, our court systems, our local government, our national government. They're all corporations, and the number one legal obligation of a corporation is to turn a profit for its shareholders. And when you understand that, you can then understand why people don't count anymore, what all them other things that make no sense to you, why they're homeless, why they're hungry people, why are all the bills so expensive, and people are cold, old people that fought wars for this country are cold, dying of hypothermia. And that's all because everything is a corporation. And I think when we can get that across to people, we'll have some chance of making some progress.
Mark?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and probably the most important point I was trying to make in a very roundabout way there. I think it's very much to do with people living in an artificial womb which has been constructed for them. I mean, the British Psychological Association and all these sort of think tanks which we cover, they're basically what is called controlling the narrative. And that's a military intelligence term. And people don't realise how much the narrative is controlled. And when they do, yes, a lot of them don't want to believe it. But, I mean, there are sort of things which are quite funny relating to what Tony said. Like, for instance, the Ministry of Justice in this country has an unsatisfied CCJ against it, which makes it a dishonourable corporation. My local council had 33 unsatisfied county court judgments against it. And you think, well, wait a minute. These are the people we're doing business with. So things like that are quite a help, I think, because they make you realise that, yes, it's just a corporate structure. And when we were talking about this ancient history, which goes back about, we've gone back to really the 1500s on Chuck Cocelli's show. And from then onwards, the statutes really changed. And what it was about was getting us off the land, making us peasants, and taking away our rights. So there's nothing new in all this. And the first and most draconian piece of statute, which is a papal bull, was called Unam Sanctum in 1302. And basically put the whole world into trust under the Holy Roman Empire, who were working for God. So they were actually administering the whole of the earth and the people on the earth for God. That's a huge assumption, but that's just a corporation making an assumption. And nobody rebutted their assumption, so it stood. And that's the thing with assumptions. People make assumptions, or corporations or governments make assumptions, and it's up to us to rebut those assumptions because they work for us. It's not the other way around. They're public servants. They serve us. They're the servants. We're the masters. And what's happened is that we are the servants and they are the masters, and that's no good. And the thing is that when you get into this and start making them accountable, things do change and they don't like it. But it's very difficult to make them accountable because once you make one accountable, somebody else writes back to you, or see, the liabilities don't work both ways. The liabilities of the state upon us are quite heavy: taxation, imprisonment, fines, etc. But it doesn't work the other way around, which I find out more and more, because basically things like the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts in this country, they basically pervert the course of justice, block evidence, and they routinely seem to be destroying people's rights all the time. But the whole point is that our trust in them is to uphold our rights, but it's the other way around. So that really needs to be addressed. And once you do look into all this stuff and start talking about it, people will go, oh, it can't be that bad. And I'll just show them the documents. Well, read it yourself. You know, I get a bit bored with all that now because people, they don't want to believe it. Which goes back to my first point when I was talking to the ITN news editor. Because they don't want to believe it doesn't mean it's true. Not true. You know, just because you don't want to believe something doesn't mean that it's not factual. It just means that you don't want to believe it. And these associations, like the British Psychological Association, and these think tanks and NGOs we have, they all rely on that. They rely on the fact that the public want to believe in something that's artificial. And this is how we get language subverted, and we get what comes out of these organizations. There, for instance, Demos, which is a government think tank over here, writing a paper called The Echo Chamber Effect, speaking to ourselves. In other words, people like us outside the mainstream are merely talking to ourselves in our own little group. I mean, it's a total reversal. They use reverse psychology all the time. And this is the sort of stuff that we cover on the show. And it's very important for people to know that this psychology goes straight to the top. It goes to your local authority, your local council. They're all using psychology as a weapon. And psychology is something that can be debunked. This is what we do all the time, because psychology is debunked by truth and fact. Propaganda is debunked by truth and fact. And empirical fact is the only thing that we have on our side, because they have all the propaganda and all the lies, but we can have the truth, and that's the important thing.
Interesting. I'll tell you, truth will actually set us free, and if people could actually wake up to this, you'd see a shift in our society. I myself, I really see a lot of people still entwined, i.e. the medical system. I mean, a lot of people I talk to will still swear by their doctor, and to me, a doctor is the biggest hypocrite in the world. You'll go into their office, they'll give you a prescription one week, you'll go back the next week, and they'll give you another prescription. Who are the drug pushers in the world? To me, a doctor is a hypocrite. We see this all through our society. We see it in the court systems. We see it in the privatized jail systems now in the United States of America, how the judges and the jail system, the people are all working together against the people. It used to be, like you said, it used to be that the government was there to serve the people, but we've seen a complete flip in our society where people now are serving the government. We've got to change that.
They have to work together, because if one corporation falls and gets exposed, then they all do. So they're intrinsically linked now. It's them against us, basically.
Yeah, and Tony, when I sit back and I think about it a lot, and I see, the biggest problem with our society is the divisions that have been put into our society. And I talk about this a lot. Divisions that have been put into our society incrementally over the last maybe 30, 40 years. I've really seen a ramp up. With multiculturalism coming into countries now, some people say multiculturalism is a good thing. I don't agree with that. I see cultures being destroyed in countries, and us being forced to assimilate to other cultures. I know you're seeing that in Europe. You want to talk on that subject just for a minute, Mark?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that goes into things like ancient history of where this all comes from. Not so ancient history as well, like the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan. Multiculturalism is to break down society. That's its only purpose. It's sold to us as some kind of liberal thing, but it's not about that. I lived in one of the most multicultural boroughs in London. Now, to be fair, there's no trouble there. All the trouble seemed to be implanted by people like MI5, as far as I could find out, because a lot of these so-called terrorists were being sort of radicalized through mosques. We're talking about Islamic terrorism. Now, the thing is that we're just fed one line. But the underlying, you see, there's two things going on here. There's the endless wars on the back of the Greater Israel, which nobody seems to really want to talk about. And if you talk about it in this country, you get labelled anti-Semitic. So we've got our government is controlled by the Israeli lobby completely. Otherwise, we wouldn't be killing Syrians. So this is a very, very important point that's not addressed. Underneath that, we have to ask, why are our countries being allowed to be impoverished through mass immigration? Because that's actually what it does. I saw this in Waltham Forest. Basically what it does, where there's nothing wrong with Polish people and Lithuanian people and Russian people. They're very good people. They're very hard working. But what they've done is, because of their standard of living is different and they can send the money back home, they've collapsed our jobs in the more kind of self-employed sector with craftsmen. Where craftsmen find it very, very difficult now to earn a living because everything's been brought down to 11. What it does is it lowers standards. So all this stuff actually does the society no good. So talking about it from this kind of liberal perspective is not what it's about. You have to look at what it's really about underneath it all.
Are we still here?
Oh, I don't know. Can you hear
Harry?
me?
Oh, hey, yeah, sorry, buddy. You know what? I had my mic muted for a second there, and I didn't realize I had it muted. Isn't that that's amateur radio for you?
I thought I was in my own little echo chamber there, talking to myself for a minute.
I'm sorry about that, gentlemen. But we're seeing this in Canada right now. I mean, we have a prime minister that every time he opens his mouth says that multiculturalism is our strength. We see thousands and thousands and thousands of immigrants coming into our country right now. Of all the Syrians and all the immigrants that have come into Canada here in the last 2 years under the Liberal government, only 8% have found employment. They're all on welfare. And now we have a prime minister that's basically opening the borders to anybody that wants to step foot in Canada. Once you step foot in Canada, you're allowed a hearing, an immigration hearing. So what we're seeing right now in Canada, in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, this summer the numbers were absolutely staggering of people coming across our border because our Prime Minister said, come on in. I mean, what the heck? I mean, I know what's going on, but Canadians really have to wake up to what this government is doing to this country. They are just absolutely destroying it, and they're doing it very quickly. But of course, it's all part of the big agenda. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, it is. It's all part of this Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which not many people know about. More and more people know about it, but not enough. And it does go into this multicultural agenda. And basically, it's about impoverishing nations and bringing them to their knees. So, in other words, if you're in any way patriotic, you're now extreme right wing. And this is absolutely ridiculous. Oh, absolutely racist, anti-Semitic, all the whole thing. I mean, I've been attacked on all those fronts, and I've always gone back with the facts. I go back with the facts and say, look, these are the facts. Deal with it. This is what's happening. These are the figures. What's this got to do with your opinion? Basically, what they do is they attack you with ad hominems. It's all about psychological subversion. So the way through that is just give them the facts and the truth. And they are the extremists. We're getting these Antifa thugs in this country, all funded by Soros. They're a complete bunch of idiots. And they're going around, we've actually covered this, disrupting meetings by old age pensioners or senior citizens. They're disrupting meetings on people talking about what they think are conspiracy theories because they've been told things are conspiracy theories. Well, it's absolutely incredible. There was a meeting about the death of Princess Diana, and a guy had written a play about it and was going to talk about why he wasn't really going to talk about the death of Princess Diana anymore. All of a sudden, it goes round to all these Antifa people that the talk was actually about Mossad killing Princess Diana, which had nothing to do with it. Right? So all these masked thugs turn up, and they're largely being sponsored by George Soros. So basically, you've got this cartoon thing going on that doesn't make any sense because there's actually no reality in any of it anymore. It's just complete pantomime, the whole thing. But it's quite a dangerous one. And what they're trying to do is destabilize the country. Basically, they want everyone who may be slightly patriotic or thinks something of their country to be marginalized as a racist or right wing. And it's very transparent. It's very, very powerful. And it goes through the media all the time. That's all they talk about. And in this country, there isn't really such a thing as the far right. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't see people goose stepping up and down with Nazi flags. I don't see people on the streets kind of making these bold statements that they seem to think people would make. What I see is the extreme left, or the people who work for the communist New World Order, basically attacking anybody who is against this this controlled narrative. And that's what we have to fight back against. And that's what we do on the show. Ridicule these people because they are worthy of ridicule.
Mm. Well, I mean, George Soros, he can't be that bad a guy because Justin Trudeau just gave $5 million to the Open Borders program that George Soros is going on right now. So, I mean, are you telling me George is a bad guy?
Well, no, it's interesting, though, because...
What a joke that is, man. And Canadians, again, are outraged by this.
By definition, George Soros is a terrorist, and there's a big campaign out there at the minute to get him properly labelled as one.
Well, I mean, I'm not a big fan of American politics, but they did start a petition along those lines, and they had over 100,000 signatures in 3 days on it, Tony. So most people are aware of who George Soros is and what he's doing to our country. Yeah. What he's doing to countries, and everything that man touches, of course, turns to crap. So,
are you aware of the
$405 million is astounding. Go ahead.
Sorry, are you aware of the $420 million, I think it was, check that Trudeau wrote out for the Clinton Foundation?
It was $20 million he gave to the Clinton Foundation, actually, Tony.
Was it?
Was the numbers? Yeah, it was $20 million he donated to the Clinton Foundation. And, of course, he paid a convicted terrorist $10.5 million because his rights were violated. I mean, if people in Canada can't see what is going on, then our country truly is going to go down the tubes. But again, I get back to the point that now Canada is a division of so many different societies that I see people not being able to get together and stand against the enemy. The enemy isn't your friend, it's not your neighbor, it's not the black man down the street or the homosexual guy you don't like. It's our governments. But again, we have such divisions in society that society keeps fighting amongst itself. They can't identify the enemy, and that's a very, very powerful weapon they're using against us. Divide a conquer. I mean, anytime you wanted to conquer a society, you divide it, and that's exactly what's going on in Canada and around the world right now. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, it's divisiveness through what they call inclusiveness. You see, it's all newspeak and it's all backwards. But of course, you've got gender-neutral passports there now, haven't you, as well?
Yeah, and you can get a driver's license now wearing a full burqa in Ontario. You don't have to show your face. Are you serious? Is this where we're going? I mean, my God. Go ahead.
Well, it's unbelievable. I mean, the LBGT thing is just beyond a joke. And now in this country, they're sort of arguing about it on the news. And all of these brain-dead news people, or, well, they're not news people, they're just kind of TV presenter puppets. It's like they've adopted this as though it's always been there. It's very strange how this has only been around for a few years, this LBGT transgender thing, and that they're pushing it into schools and telling kids that they don't have to be boys and girls anymore. Well, this is quite a big thing, and it's addressed as though this has always been normal and that this is progressive, you see. It's always about progressive. And really, this is about just destroying people's minds, because people who are confused about themselves are always going to be confused about most things. And that's not a generalization, because this is the way that people's minds are broken down. And it's this confusion that they're putting into minds, and divide and rule strategies with every group against each other. I mean, we covered this. It was on Chuck's show. You know, we had this the slut walk thing, and it's just incredible. You've got all these kind of little groups that are all broadly into these agendas, and some of them oppose each other in certain ways, but they all go for this what they call neoliberalism, which we all have to sort of suffer now. But what's interesting is that there's no opposition to it in any of the press. So we now know that the press is merely a vehicle for PR. There was a book that came out many years ago in the 80s called Toxic Sludge is Good for You. And it was about the way that PR had taken over news. And that was then, because obviously with cable TV and these rolling 24-hour non-news stations, which have 3 stories which are repeated, it's just a PR exercise. So this is why we cover a lot of this stuff, where it comes from. Like the Tavistock Institute in this country was the centre of psychological subversion. But we're in what we're actually experiencing is a psychological warfare tactic. That's all this is. It's psychological warfare against the public. And that's what they have to realise. It's not about anything else. It's just psychology that's being used against you. And people, they go along with this and they get drawn into it. But if you stand back from it, you can see how ridiculous it actually is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You know, Mark, when I was growing up in school, there was boys and there was girls. I mean, there wasn't people telling children at 5 or 6 or 7 years old that if they want to be a girl, they can be a girl, and it's okay to be a girl if you want to be a girl, and vice versa. And really what you're seeing is the destruction of the family unit. And that's something that I see very, very strongly in our society, is how the family is being destroyed.
Well, this is a big part of the UN program, isn't it?
Of course,
this is what the United Nations is all about, destroying that. Because you want to be a world citizen, you see. So the state is the parent. The state is the parent. That's the point.
Family, your mom and dad, they don't have a clue what they're talking about. Listen to your teacher, listen to your politician. They'll put you in the right track. And that's where exactly they're taking in our society right now. The CORE program in the United States of America is a perfect example. And we see the same program being implemented in Canadian schools now.
So we had a primary school teacher here. And I don't know why this was filmed, but it was. And she was telling a child in a classroom, this woman only looked about 20. And she was a teacher, primary school teacher. And she was saying Trump is a lot like Hitler.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, even to a 4-year-old, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. Why would you even say that? But this is how brainwashed they are. And you find it's like a disease. It's a virus of the mind. It's definitely a virus of the mind, that's put there by psychological subversion. And when you talk in those terms, people go, oh, that's ridiculous. But all this they have to do is look at history and the history of what this is about. And it's all about psychology. This is what we are suffering from in this country. That's all it is. It's a psychological warfare that's used against the public relentlessly, and eventually they give in. That's the point.
Yeah, you know what? In Ontario now, the sex education program they've implemented in the schools are teaching children in grade 4 about masturbation. In grade 6, they're taught how to use a dildo. This is the sex education program now been implemented by the Liberal government, Catherine Wynne in Ontario. And that alone just shocks me, the uproar against it. Thousands of Ontario people spoke against it. That nobody was heard. They had public hearings. It was just a farce. They implemented this program and they shoved it down our throats. And to me, there's no way to describe it but evil, because to implement these thoughts into a child when they're even before the age of puberty is just absolutely barbaric. I don't know how else to describe it, but that's what's going on in our school systems. And really, if a child is given these thoughts at that point in their life, you know, children are most impressionable between the ages of, I think it's between 7 and 10 years old. I would report they're the most impressionable ages in their life. And they look at their teacher. I remember going to school. I looked at my teacher, was a good guy. He's telling me the truth. Well, if this is what's coming out of our school system is being put to our children by the teachers, it's really having an impact on the way they see the world. And it's totally upside down. What was good is now bad, and what's bad is now good. The family unit is being destroyed. Go ahead.
It's beyond the family unit being destroyed. They're destroying sexuality. They're androgenizing the populations. And what you're talking about there in education, we're going to do a show about maybe next Sunday, not this one, the Sunday after, hopefully, but Common Core, the Indian company that now runs the education in Canada, the US, the UK, and a few other countries. And they're one of the financially fastest growing companies out there on the planet today. And their plans for our children are pretty shocking. And we always like to get our information from the horse's mouth. And if you can have a read up on the programs for Common Core, how that's going to be changing completely. You're saying that the teachers are teaching these lessons. Well, that role is going to be changing. Very shortly, they will be just supervising how children are interacting with computers. And not long after that, I'm pretty sure that they will be just wearing virtual reality or augmented reality glasses. And the days of the classroom, the book, the computer, like the physical computer, are all going to be over. Education is going to be stylized per child, which in some ways is a good thing, but the way they're going about it is really not so good, I don't think, anyway. But you're going to see the role of teachers diminished to kind of like hall monitors, where they just make sure that the kids are interacting with their devices, and all of that part of it is down in black and white in their curriculum. And also it's going to make home education impossible, because you won't be able to get any exams at all unless you follow this curriculum in this way. So it's looking even more scary if people don't actually wake up to this and really do something about it. I mean, I'm not sure that jumping up and down on the streets is going to do anything. I don't know what really the way forward is, but you certainly need a critical mass of people that we're a long way from, to understand what's going on and actually sit down and read what it is that these people plan to do to your children. They need to read it properly.
Mark, weigh in on that one, okay, please.
Yeah, well, I agree with what Tony's saying, but I also think that now is the time for, heaven forbid, for people to start acting slightly under the radar with this and actually getting together and forming groups, because when you oppose things in this country, controlled opposition groups are always set up, and this goes with everything. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Grenfell Tower disaster or whether you're talking about some local group who's campaigning for something. I think people need to start being strategic about this, because what we've got now is a society of what I call change agents. There's people in every level of society who have been mentored to be there to control the narrative, and they are working against your interests. Under the banner of things like social equity and diversity. And that is the thing. This is psychological warfare, and I've reiterated that a couple of times, but having looked into it a long time, it all runs on psychology. All of it is about psychology and basically not truth. So the thing is that the golden rule of law states that everybody is equal under the law and nobody is above the law. And that's a very, very important thing just to think about, because what I've seen recently and for quite some time is public officials who are officers acting above the law, above and beyond the law. And what they're doing with all this LGBT stuff is above and beyond the law, because it's not done by consent of the governed. It's being imposed. So we also have to think about subversion, because a lot of this comes from Soviet subversion. And me and Tony have done a couple of things on this. There's a great video by Yuri Bezmenov, Yuri Bezmenov was a Soviet defector in the 80s, and he said that the country has to be willingly subverted. And the people that they use initially to destabilize the country are so-called leftists, which is the Antifa mob, and all this political correct mob. They are the people who are used to destabilize the country. Once destabilization has occurred, then they will be disregarded. They will be of no use whatsoever. And the people that will be used from then on will be the rich narcissists and people with real power. So that's a message to all these loony leftists and people who think they're on the left, who they're not on the left. They're actually extremists. And that's what's happened. We've got a whole load of people who are now obsessed with trivia. Like, for instance, Trump's sexist. And so does that mean that Hillary Clinton is not a criminal? It's kind of very strange. And we see these stations like Democracy Now! That's really a total front for intelligence services. It's an absolute disgrace. They promote the climate change nonsense all day long, and then they pretend to be sort of sympathetic to what's going on in Gaza, etc., when in fact it's just a front for this crazy liberalism that's going on. And we have this all over the place. Most people just haven't got any access to decent information, or they don't want it. So they're just getting what's spewed out of the mainstream, which is getting worse and worse all the time.
So we all know this right now, Mark. What would you say to people if they really wanted to get involved right now and starting to make change in our society? What would you suggest to them?
You have to start with yourself and actually start looking into what it is that you are and what you are within the system, and then look at what the system is doing to you, and do you like it? Do you agree to what's happening? Well, if you don't agree to what's happening, why are you acquiescing and agreeing by consent? This is by consent, right? So exactly. Your borders are being destroyed by consent because the people are consenting. They're being psychologically manipulated to consent through fear and ridicule and extremism, through this fake liberal ideology, which is all about destroying everything. And they're going along with it because they're in fear through political correctness. Well, people need to stop fearing political correctness and say, look, your arguments don't work. This is not a right or left issue. This is about subversion. Exactly. And you people are subversives, and you are destroying the cultures of all the world. That's the whole point of this plan. It's not just about mass immigration and multiculturalism. It's about destroying belief in everything so they can have this fake one world government, fake one world religion. So if that's what you want, then you are going to be living in Brave New World stroke 1984, which is pretty much there already. But if you don't want to be in that, get organised locally and start resisting it. And one thing that these public officials do not like is being made personally liable. Make them personally liable and resist it. It's not actually that difficult because there's so many of the people and there's so few of these bureaucrats. They work for us. Well, wait a minute. Well, why are we putting up with it? It doesn't make sense. If you came from another planet, you'd go, what's the matter with these people? Why do they put up with this? You would just go, wait a minute. There's no logic to this, right? They don't like the society they live in, but they accept it. Now, what sort of people would do that?
Well, those that believe in the voting system are those that do it, in my opinion. And when you vote, you're giving your consent, aren't you? So You know, they take that they're in there from the power of the electorate. So I don't know.
Well, I'm talking about individual responsibility. Yes, it's about the responsibility of the individual. You can't blame the government. You can't blame a government.
No, I've been saying for many years we are the problem and we are the solution. But that's where they're getting the consent from voters.
Well, I think a lot of this starts, a lot of this tyranny starts with things that we don't like parking tickets. That describes everything that people don't like about implied contracts, So look into how you can defeat them, and it's very easy. Then take a few steps. I mean, this is what I find very empowering, is the lower courts, the administrative courts, and dealing with these people. The scary thing is that the corruption is on a massive scale, much bigger than people would ever believe. The corruption that I've seen it's endemic within the whole of the system. So the people go, oh yeah, well we know that. Well, you don't know that until you've actually identified where it is and who's doing it. People to talk about generally about corruption, it doesn't mean anything. But you have to identify what's going wrong, who, what, why, where, and when. Just use those things. Be very analytic about it, because that once you start getting a few victories, it starts giving you a bit more confidence. And I think that's an important point here, because most people are just sat in front of their tellies going, well, what can I do? Well, that's the point. The majority have always been like that. That's why society exists the way it does, because it's a consensus. It's generally believed that that's for the greater good. In other words, collectivism is based on that. So the New World Order is about collectivism. I'm a bit of an individual. I like to do my own thing. I don't want my property rights destroyed. I don't want my travel rights destroyed. And I don't like being treated like a criminal when I go through an airport. I don't like being fined for everything I do. And I also want to go where I want to go, when I want to go to. Some people might say that's a bit selfish, but I call that freedom.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We're down to the last couple of minutes of the show here, guys. So in the last couple of minutes here, Mark, I'd like you to plug your website and your TV show, and I'll give Tony a couple thoughts, and we'll close out the show. Thanks for joining me. Go ahead. We got
about thanks, Barry. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, windowsontheworld.net is the website, and we put a show out every week. We've got a show that myself and Tony do every Sunday called Windows on the World at autonomousmedia.net, and we cover some very interesting issues on that. What I try and do on the show is focus things. So we've had a general chat today. It's been really interesting. We've covered some quite big areas, I think, in a short amount of time. But what we tend to do with the shows is make it very, very focused. So I would recommend that people listen to the shows, because there's a lot of information in there. They're information heavy, and we are in a war for information. The war against us is about misinformation. So I'm not saying that all my information is essential, but I'm saying that there's essential information within the shows. And I only put out stuff that's incredibly well researched, so people can rely on the stuff that I've put in the shows. For instance, if there's a remedy, I'll have tried it. I will never put out something that I haven't tried. I will never put out information I haven't researched and actually found to be true. And that's really the important thing here. There's too much hearsay, people getting dragged off in the wrong direction. It's about being focused, and I think at this point, getting organised.
Excellent. Tony, last thought. We got about maybe a minute or 30 seconds left here.
Yeah, I'd just encourage people to look into jurisdiction and corporations, and do their research, spread the word around as much as they can, because I think that's where the answers lie. When enough people understand what the problems are, we might have a lot better ideas of how we'd go about fixing them. Because at the minute, I think if we was just to throw everything on its head that we've got and overturn government, if you like.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank Mark. Thank Tony. Great show. We'll see you guys next week. Please tune in. Bye for now.
Cheers, Barry.
Cheers, Barry.